Hello and welcome to our devotion for today. It is October 30th and we're starting the book of Revelation, or not Revelation, Lamentations. And we're going to do something a little different, um, looking at the book of Lamentations as a whole here. So this is more on the entire book of Lamentations than it is on the particular reading for today. So yesterday we looked at chapters 1 and 2. Today the reading was chapter 3. So we're going to just look at the whole book. It's a book for today. Lamentations is. Human suffering threatens to overwhelm us, and Lamentations speaks of and to suffering, giving voice to the most awful pain that you can think of. Yet, quite often, Lamentations is neglected. In fact, once I bought a Bible at a bookstore and it didn't even have the book of Lamentations in it. It wasn't printed correctly. It was left out. So these days, however, such an error might go unnoticed because few churches and few pastors take up any time preaching on it or studying it. Most people don't realize, in fact, that the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, gets some of its language from today's reading, from Lamentations 3:23. Lamentations presents the cry of the generation that endured the siege and destruction of the temple in Jerusalem back in 587 BC, and also they survived the slaughter and captivity that followed. We need to remember the realities that were endured by these people just like us. Furthermore, Lamentations isn't just a book. A lament is a whole literary genre with its own vocabulary that God saw fit to include in His Word. Sadly, many times in our culture, we're taught to keep our laments to ourselves. Lamentations also wrestles with some big theological issues, such as how faith and extreme suffering can exist side by side, and it tackles the tough questions of how God can be just and holy and yet merciful at the same time. Most importantly, it helps us to get an insight into how Jesus Himself expressed the deepest laments ever heard by human ears. Some have objected to the traditional view that Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations. They say it offers too little hope in view of what Jeremiah wrote in the book which bears his name. However, we need to remember that Jeremiah himself witnessed and lived through the terrible suffering of the people of Judah that was connected to the siege of Jerusalem. So he wasn't going to just offer up a flimsy, oh, everything will turn out just fine in the end, you see. Something is to be said for weeping with those who weep. Of course, we don't know for certain who wrote the book of Lamentations. The author never divulges his own name. So without ruling Jeremiah out, it isn't a bad practice to simply call the author of Lamentations the poet, because it's all poetry. The poetry in Lamentations uses acrostics, which with each line beginning with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It also uses a type of meter that limps along with 3 beats and then 2, 3, and 2. It's hard to capture the effect in English, but it is powerfully downbeat in Hebrew. Lastly, Lamentations introduces a whole array of literary characters. It really is masterful. But one thing is that God Himself doesn't speak in the book. He's silent throughout. Kathleen O'Connor calls this the power of the missing voice. Though God is silent, God emerges as the ultimately faithful and compassionate one who, even when He inflicts people in judgment, does not do so from His heart. God is the one to whom you can bring your anger, your pain, your protest. God is also the one to whom you bring your penitence and prayer. And God is the one in whom alone your hope can be ultimately secure, however long it might be delayed. In the end, the book of Lamentations voices the pain of those who knowingly suffered under the judgment of God. And if that's true, and it is, how much more so does it speak for those who suffer all kinds of other woes, such as inexplicable disasters, or as refugees, or as victims of war, or even under persecution for the name of Christ. The imagery of Lamentations captures the turmoil that exists in our world, the turmoil of anger, shame, grief, abandonment, humiliation, and protest. In short, Lamentations is real. And since it is real, we can understand that all of God's word is real right alongside it. So if Lamentations gives voice to human tears, we must then understand that tears themselves are precious to God. He sees and hears those who weep, and he does not forget their tears. God weeps with his people. In our afflictions, he was afflicted, and one day, God most certainly will wipe away tears from every face, and the sound of weeping will be heard no more in the eternal joy of heaven. May God be with you and bless you, and I'll look